We're bringing you live coverage of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Berlin. Zelensky's already met with German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. This is Zelensky's first visit to Germany since Russia invaded Ukraine. He arrived late last night under heavy security. Just hours before he arrived, Germany announced a new package of military aid worth more than 2.7 billion euros. And DW's political correspondent Thomas Sparrow is with me in the studio for some analysis on Zelensky's visit to Germany. Hello to you, Thomas. So why don't we start by just speaking about the timing of this visit? We just mentioned that Zelensky's arrival here in Berlin follows talks in Italy and also comes a day after Germany announced a major aid package for Ukraine. What else is significant about this timing?
It's obviously no coincidence that Germany announced this very big package just as President Zelensky was about to come to Germany. It's being described as the biggest package yet from Germany to Ukraine. Very big and very important indeed. And it just strengthens that support that Germany has provided for Ukraine. It's important to stress that despite many problems, despite many controversies in the bilateral relationship, Germany remains as one of the countries that has supported Ukraine the most, both from an economic perspective, also from a military perspective.
And Thomas, just to interrupt you briefly, just to let our viewers know, we were watching live pictures of Zelensky being received at the chancellery, where he will be honored with military honors. We are still waiting for Zelensky's arrival, which should happen any moment. So we do know that Germany had been criticized previously for not offering enough support. Would you say then that now that it has announced the biggest aid package yet, as you just mentioned, is all well?
I wouldn't say that all is well, but I would say that that's the message that politicians want to send, that there have been problems in the past, that Germany has indeed been criticized for its reluctance when it comes to those speedy deliveries. Germany has delivered a lot, but it hasn't done so very fast. It was always been accompanied by a very big political debate in the country as to whether Germany should or shouldn't carry out that support. So Germany has indeed supported Ukraine. This is another sign that it is doing so, but there has also been criticism that has been accompanied by certain reluctance, and that reluctance has to do a little bit with Germany's past. Germany has had a very, very big reluctance generally, not only with Ukraine, but generally about sending weapons to conflict zones. It sees its role also mostly on the diplomatic front, and this war in Ukraine has actually changed the way Germany thinks about these kinds of issues. The fact that Germany is now announcing, for example, this very big package really points to that direction, really strengthens that idea that Germany is now thinking about those military deliveries as well as that political support that it can give to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. And one other thing, Mariana, that's important, President Zelensky is coming to Germany at a time when he's also going to receive an important award, the Charlemagne Prize in the city of Aachen in Western Germany. So that, again, is also a sign that Germany and Ukraine would like to maybe leave behind those differences, leave behind that controversy and focus on the support, also at an important time in the war in Ukraine.
And Thomas, we just saw live pictures of Zelensky with German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. It appears that Zelensky was leaving the Bellevue Palace and is headed now to the chancellery. And it's interesting to remember that, in fact, Kiev had snubbed a visit by President Steinmeier in the weeks immediately following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Can you remind us what happened back then?
Well, first, it's important to remind our viewers that Mr. Steinmeier is Germany's president, so Germany's head of state. So Mr. Zelensky is obviously meeting him, but he will also meet German Chancellor Scholz. And it's correct what you mentioned, that the relationship between Mr. Steinmeier and Mr. Zelensky was not always good. That has to do with certain criticism that Steinmeier and the German government, the past German government in particular, had received for being too close to Russia, especially on economic terms. You may remember the Nord Stream pipeline. You may remember all that discussion about Germany's dependence on Russian gas and Russian energy. And Mr. Steinmeier had been Germany's foreign minister back then. So that's why that relationship was strained. Mr. Steinmeier did, however, apologize, and the relationship has improved since then. And I see this visit now to the German presidency as a sign that that relationship is strengthening and improving. And in fact, I do expect President Zelensky to strengthen that idea, those thanks to the German people, also to the German government and the German presidency when it comes, again, not only to the military delivery, which is very important, but also to the political support. Germany does play a very important role at a European level when it comes to trying to find political support. It hasn't always been smooth. It hasn't always been easy. Germany has indeed received a lot of criticism, but I think the German government is now trying, especially with this visit now, to make things a little smoother and a little better, especially considering that we're talking about a possible very important time, very important period when it comes to the war in Ukraine.
You talked about these very important economic ties that Germany has had historically with Russia. And as this war continues, it's clear that Germany had to take a position. What does this mean for Germany's relations with Russia moving forward? And is it willing to sacrifice these very intense economic ties that it had for decades because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
I would say it has already sacrificed it. In fact, if you look at Germany's energy mix, Germany has definitely reduced its dependence on Russian gas. When the war in Ukraine started, Germany began to look for alternative sources of energy, actually in a very intense way, and that has been successful to a large extent. So Germany has definitely sacrificed that relationship it had with Russia in order to have not only stronger relations with Ukraine, but also to show that Germany on a European level can be a much better, much more reliable partner. However, I would like to remind viewers that Germany is not necessarily a country that moves very fast when it comes to changing. Germany is sometimes seen as a power that changes slowly with a lot of debate inside the country. But in this particular case, only days after the war in Ukraine began, German Chancellor Scholz pronounced a speech at the German Bundestag, which was described as a very important one. He mentioned the word Zeitenwende, so change of political era, and that change of political era was, on the one hand, a change of era politically, in other words, supporting Ukraine, in other words, reducing that dependence on Russia, and on the other hand, making sure that Ukraine received the support that it needed economically, but also militarily. And that is something that we're seeing now. It hasn't happened as fast as maybe Ukraine would like, as fast as maybe some of Germany's allies would like, but it has happened indeed. And I think that's something that Mr. Zelensky would certainly reflect on today, not only in his visits in Berlin, when he sees the German president, the German chancellor, but also when receiving that important prize in the city of Aachen.
And now, Thomas, just to also remind our viewers, we already have seen the German Chancellor anticipating the arrival of President Zelensky. They're still waiting for him to appear. You talked about how the German leadership has now made it very clear that it stands firmly behind Ukraine and is doing everything that it can to support Ukraine's fight against the Russian invasion, and also making promises to help the country rebuild after the devastation and all the destruction that is caused by this conflict. But what about the German public? How much support do German voters have for Ukraine, for the continuous financial support of Ukraine by essentially taxpayer dollars?
That's absolutely correct, and it's important to stress that Germany, but not only in Germany, when you make big political decisions, the country, the government needs to see how the public is going to react. And to a large extent, the public has also shifted its position. If you look at recent polls, you can clearly see a division when it comes to support by the German public towards the German government when it comes to its policy on Ukraine. It's about half. However, Germans do seem in a majority to support weapons deliveries. But there's also an increase in the number of people who see this maybe critically, who believe that it's going too far. Around a third, in fact, of Germans think it's going too far. And something else, which I believe is particularly important, is that a majority of Germans, according to recent polls, thinks that Germany's diplomatic efforts are not going far enough. So in other words, that Germany should do much more in this regard.
All right, Thomas, we can see that the vehicles are pulling up, and Chancellor Scholz is about to greet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Let's follow along.
So what we're seeing there is the German chancellery in Berlin, so in the center of Berlin. And we're expecting the military honors to actually start after these greetings by President Zelensky and Mr. Scholz in the German chancellery.
Quite a lot of security ahead of this visit and also right now by the German police. Of course, President Zelensky is a target by...
There's always high security when you have presidents or prime ministers come, but in this particular case, that security has been even more. But police in Berlin have been preparing for this visit for quite some time now. We now see Mr. Zelensky greeting different members of the German government. So you see, for example, one of the people there on the right is the spokesperson of Chancellor Scholz, and now Mr. Zelensky is greeting some of Mr. Scholz's closest advisors, and he's going one by one. And we expect that after these greetings, those military honors will start. Military honors that, by the way, are reserved obviously for very important guests. And Germany does see President Zelensky as one of Germany's most important guests in this particular case. That visit has been accompanied by a lot of interest, a lot of expectation, both from the government and from the German public. And you can clearly see this in the way that it has been prepared. So you see this line of people that are now greeting both Chancellor Scholz and President Zelensky. And it is expected that both leaders will have also a bilateral discussion and also even a discussion with more people in the Chancellery, so an extended inner circle as it's described. But I believe that now, when they come to that position, it's when the military honors will start.
That was the Ukrainian national anthem played by Germany's military orchestra. Now, of course, we're hearing the German national anthem. That was the German anthem played by the German military orchestra. You're watching DW News. If you're just joining us, we're bringing you live coverage of the visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the German capital, where he has just arrived at the chancellery with talks with Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Zelensky was just received with military honors. And also standing by following all of these developments is DW's chief political correspondent, Nina Hase, who is in fact in front of the chancellery in Berlin. And our political correspondent, Thomas Sparrow, is still with me in the studio. So, Nina, why don't we begin with you? You're on site. And it isn't every political leader who is greeted with military honors. What is the significance of how Zelensky is being greeted in Berlin today?
You can't overestimate just how important this visit is to the German government, to the relationship between Germany and Ukraine. There's symbolism that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is actually here and holding talks with the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. This was a rocky relationship for much of last year, and this also comes at a time when, of course, Ukraine is preparing for a counteroffensive, and Germany announced this big military package on Saturday. So strong signals there that Germany does stand firmly behind Ukraine. There was a lot of doubt from Ukraine last year just how reluctant Germany was and how willing it was to support Ukraine militarily. But this is now really the symbol of two countries trying to open a new chapter and leave all these differences behind them. Volodymyr Zelensky is being treated here in Berlin like the US president or like an Israeli prime minister. When they come, the whole area here, the government quarters are cordoned off. This is also happening here today because, of course, it is a highly risky visit. There were leaks of details of the plan, just how Berlin police had been preparing for it, that angered and frustrated Ukrainians extremely. So this is something where the Berlin police are having to investigate now just how this could happen. And still, Volodymyr Zelensky did pull through with it. He did arrive in Berlin. Up until the very last minute, it wasn't clear, and nobody was allowed to talk about the fact that he was going to come or that that people were making preparations. So I can hear this big sigh of relief almost from members of the German government that this is actually happening, that we just listened to the Ukrainian anthem played at the chancellery behind me.
And now, Thomas, you mentioned this before, that it's no coincidence that Zelensky's visit comes a day after Germany announced this massive financial aid package for Ukraine, the biggest one to date. Tell us about that.
If you look at what President Zelensky is trying to achieve with this visit, you can say that on the short term, it is about military support. So the fact that Germany announced this package worth 2.7 billion euros in military aid, the biggest package that Germany has offered yet, is a sign that Mr. Zelensky is taking that, let's say, with him back to Kiev, that he has achieved his short-term goal. If you look at what the medium to long-term goal could be, that has to do with political support, with embedding Ukraine further into European structures. Many European countries have signaled that they would like Ukraine to be part of European structures or even transatlantic structures like NATO. But one thing is what they say and another thing is what actually can happen in that regard. So we may see some sign of support verbally, but I don't expect that to happen in a very concrete way just yet. But Mr. Zelensky would be interested in getting some sign of support that is not only about the immediate term, it's not only about that military aid, it's not only about economic aid, it's also about a long-term perspective for Ukraine within the European Union framework. So those are the two things that I think Mr. Zelensky is trying to achieve with this visit, as well as what Nina already mentioned, namely making sure that the rocky relations from the past, that the controversies from the past are actually set aside, are actually an issue of the past, and that both countries can look forward, especially considering that many analysts are saying that the war in Ukraine now is entering a very difficult phase. So Ukraine can actually count with German support in this very difficult phase.
So Nina, as Thomas was just talking about, the hope is that these previous rocky relations between Germany and Ukraine as a result of Germany's initial reluctance to supply hardware for Ukraine's military to fight against the Russian invasion, now that that's clearly changed and that Germany will be providing all sorts of military equipment, do you feel, though, that the perception of Germany in Ukraine will somehow change? And what about the perception among the German public? How do they view the government's sudden increase in support and commitment to Ukraine moving forward?
Well, there was no doubt that Germany was on the side of Ukraine. That is not something that was ever put into question. When it comes to public support here in Germany for just how to help Ukraine, you do see a picture that is slightly divided. Many people think it's going too far. Germany has a history of staying out, trying to stay out of military conflicts around the world, not being involved militarily. There's always a lot of debate also with the German parliament, with civil society here. There were rules in place that said that Germany couldn't deliver weapons to active crisis regions. Now, these rules were all overthrown, essentially, after Russia's full-scale invasion happened last year. And Germany is in the process of redefining itself and also reckoning with the fact that sometimes you do need to have military resistance capabilities in order to defend the values that this country stands for. And the politicians from this government all agree that it is something that Russia is clearly threatening, not just Ukraine, but fundamentally the international peace order and multilateral organizations, and that this is not tolerable. So no country should be allowed to move borders by force is a signal that is coming out of Germany. And with this symbolism of sending this big military aid, now, of course, this is a sign that Germany says we have understood, but we are a country that is moving slowly. So just how quickly we can deliver might be a different question. And here in the German public, there's also a debate about why do you not try to bring peace negotiations forwards more? And the government is having a hard time trying to explain to voters as well that this is something that can only happen once the war has ended. And this is something that only Vladimir Putin can do.